Community Outreach Specialist at Russell, A Place of Promise. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to have my lovely panel to the left of me introduce themselves with their name, their organization, and their role.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Webb. I'm a community land trust consultant based out of Orlando, Florida. And I look forward to this conversation that we're going to have today.
My name is Helen Dunlap, and I'm an old houser. Been in the affordable housing business since about 1975. Consulting in a variety of places in the country, and I actually live in Bronzeville in Chicago, where I've been for about the last 22 years. I'm here today as a advisor, one of the many to ARPA.
And I am Kevin Dunlap. I am the Executive Director for Rebound, Inc. Rebound stands for Rebuilding Our Urban Neighborhood Dwellings. We are a local nonprofit housing developer of affordable housing.
All right, so to begin our conversation off today, Mr. Jason Webb has done us all a favor with his expertise. He has created some slides that he is going to be discussing and going through to be able to inform you all exactly what a community land trust is and how it works. Before we actually get into the questioning session, community land trust can be a tricky topic for some individuals because they don't actually understand its purpose, how they're developed, what they look like, and how it actually helps the community. So Mr. Webb has done us all a favor, so I'm going to kick it over to Mr. Webb and let him get to his slides.
So I'm going to go through, and anytime I talk about the community land trust, I also love to talk about the roots of the community land trust, because the model itself has been modeled from our roots. So this is a model that's been around now for 50 plus years, and actually where it started was in actually 1968. An American delegation that was looking for a different way of land ownership, specifically in the South for African American farmers. They were being forced off of their land, and they were trying to figure out a way of collectively owning land together and being able to prosper together. The first community land trust here in the United States was developed 1 year after this exploration of new land ownership in Georgia, called New Communities Incorporated. This model actually started to take off in the 1970s, when it actually adapted itself from agriculture to urban settings. So the first urban community land trust was actually established in Cincinnati, Ohio. We fast forward to the 1980s, and this is where government actually started to come in to help to support the creation of community land trust, and there were three major cities that stepped up and did that. One was in Burlington, Vermont. The second one was actually in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the third one is in actually my hometown of Boston, Massachusetts. There was a fourth that was also in Syracuse, New York. And this is where the government gave grants to nonprofits to go ahead and start this new type of land ownership. But in 1985, we also got some heartbreak because the first community land trust that was actually established got foreclosed on. And it was predominantly because of racist policies within Georgia that forced this community land trust to start to take debt onto the land. And when they weren't able to actually refinance those loans or get government-backed grants to come in and actually take care of those loans, the creditors came knocking and took away all of their land. We actually fast forward to today, where that same organization, New Communities Incorporated, actually has been rebirthed. And they actually have reestablished themselves back in Georgia, owning land and continuing this model to this day. For the United States, there's over 300 community land trusts, and over those 300 community land trusts, thousands of housing units have been established. Now, what is a community land trust? And this is sort of the definition, the definition that I work from. A community land trust is a nonprofit, community-based corporation committed to the stewardship and the affordability of land, housing, and other buildings used for the community benefit in perpetuity. Now, the founders of this model called this model a community land trust. And they were very specific about that C. And what they considered the C as the community land trust is a democratically structured nonprofit with an open membership and a board of directors elected by that membership. Because they wanted to make sure that the members, the community, had the ultimate power of what's going to happen in their own place. The idea of membership by our founders is that the members would have ultimate approval on what happens with this organization and by extension, what's happening in their own community. So membership rights were any bylaw changes that would need to happen would have to go through the membership. Any changes to what's called this resale formula, again, the membership would have to be consulted and actually vote on. Any disposition of assets, again, it's not a board of directors conversation, it's not a staff conversation. It has to go back to the community, and the community, as the membership, needs to decide. The selling of land, and also, God forbid, if the organization ever needed to dissolve, again, that's not a board conversation or a staff conversation. The community should be making that ultimate decision. Now, the basic of a community land trust is that a community land trust acquires, owns, and stewards land permanently for the common good. Community land trusts are known for its affordable housing, but it can be used for commercial spaces, community spaces, farming, open land. I love to say anything you can do with real estate, you can put onto a community land trust, because it's about who gets to make those decisions. Is it folks from the outside, or is it actually folks that live in that community? The vehicle itself has three major components to it. One is this idea of membership and governance. Who gets to be at that table? Who gets to be the decision makers? The second core element of a community land trust is, again, you're holding the land and sometimes government subsidies in trust for the ultimate purpose of what it's needed. And this third important element is called stewardship. We all know that for homeowners, if you get a little bit more additional support, you're going to actually become a better homeowner. A community land trust helps steward these properties permanently. So as we bring in homeowners and as we bring individuals into the community land trust, we want to support them in every way possible so that they can be the best homeowners that they can be. All three of these elements make up a community land trust. So as I've said, there's over 300 community land trusts here in the United States. We've seen amazing growth actually in the 1990s and now. The community land trust model is actually in 46 states, plus the District of Columbia and in Puerto Rico. And again, anything that can be done with real estate is put onto this model. It's about permanent affordability. You know, and I actually do this work nationally, and a lot of times I work with inside communities that get amazing facilities like this. And one of the things that happens in certain communities is you can get a lot of investment coming in, but what happens to that community over time is it starts to become less and less affordable. So these are important elements, and this is one model of trying to keep some affordability in a community, to have a good mix of different housing. So those are my slides, and I look forward to the rest of our conversation and to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webb, for that lovely detailed explanation. So you have pretty much detailed exactly what a community land trust is, and we appreciate that for giving everybody a clear picture of what that looks like. The first question that I'm going to have for you is probably some of the questions, or stem from some of the questions that are already in the minds of the individuals that are in the audience. So you explained a little bit of how much it actually works, but beyond how it actually works, what are some common questions that you hear from people when you talk to them about community land trust?
So one of the biggest elements of the community land trust is that we're trying to keep the home permanently affordable. So let me run a scenario with everybody. It may cost $300,000 to develop a home. A family can only afford a mortgage for, let's say, $150,000. The community land trust is going to come in with what that gap money is. Now, as that homeowner actually stays in the home and starts paying off that mortgage, they may want to leave. They may want to sell that home. Now, property values in a community can rise, and they can also fall. Most of the time, what we've seen over the past few years is that values just keep going up. But this homeowner, because she's bought or he has bought a home for a reduced price, does not mean that they're going to be able to sell for what the market price of that home is. They're going to sell for a below market price to help another family be able to get into the home. So one of the biggest questions that I always have in this scenario is, well, how does homeowners build wealth then? If they're not able to actually achieve what the market price of the home is. And it's a fair question, and our studies have shown through the 30 plus years that we've had homeowners in CLT homes that folks do build wealth. But wealth is more than about just money. Wealth is also about choices. And when you actually own a home and have stable housing, you actually have a different set of choices than what other folks have when they don't have affordable housing. So one of the things that we say is that folks will always be able to make money off of real estate. They will never make what they would make if they were able to buy a home on the regular market. But we also have to be realistic that they would not be able to afford a market rate home. So they're trying to pay forward to another family so that next family can also build a little bit of wealth. So that's been, to me, the number one question is, how do folks actually build wealth? And if I had more time, I would pull out more numbers and run through more scenarios. But I can assure you that any homeowner that has bought a home in a community land trust and sold it has made money on the end of that transaction. No community land trust homeowner in our 30 plus years of having homeowners on our home, within our model, has lost. And that's something that you cannot say for folks inside the regular real estate market. Because some folks have lost quite a bit of money when they've had to sell their home in sometimes an emergency. So that, I would say, would be the number one question that usually comes up.
With that, I just want to be able to have a little clarification. So with the scenario that you proposed, you said that the house cost $300,000 and that the family could afford $150,000. Say that the family was able to pay off their mortgage for the $150,000, but the house had accrued a value to say $325,000. So what you're saying is that when the individual sells the house, then they will gain then that $25,000.
So the way that it would work is that if they're buying the house for $150,000, and we all know that sometimes wealth accumulation is when you're paying off your mortgage every month, you are actually building equity. You're paying yourself because your principal keeps going down. So let's say they go ahead and they sell and they pay off their mortgage. So they're going to be able to get their $150,000 back because they paid that completely off, but they're only going to be able to make a certain percentage above that. They're never going to see the $325,000 that's on the market, but they will see a percentage increase of what they actually bought it for. Now, what that percentage is differs from community land trust to community land trust, and it depends also on where the market is and where the income levels are. But again, there's always something on the back end.
Thank you for clarifying there for me and for the audience as well. The next question that I have is going to be for Mr. Dunlap. Mr. Dunlap, you've been involved in work to start a community land trust here in Louisville. Can you talk about why that work is so important and what you hope will result with that work?
Ooh, that's a big question. How did I get started in this? To be perfectly honest, I'd heard about the community land trust model from different communities all across the country. And as the executive director for Rebound, whose focus is on affordable housing, and particularly with the emphasis on increasing Black homeownership, I was thinking of a model of creating a housing land trust, not calling it a community land trust, but a housing land trust that Rebound would control, own, and operate, and to present this type of model. But the more and more that I began to hear from other communities and from other people, I began to realize that the true spirit of a community land trust is what was really needed in this city. One of the things that I began to see is in some neighborhoods how rapidly they began to start to gentrify. And particularly around the times that, major development comes into certain neighborhoods, then all of a sudden people start coming in and buying up the houses, buying up the real estate. And when you look at the homeownership rates in these traditional African-American neighborhoods, they are extremely low, extremely low. And so the community land trust to me sounded like a good tool, one of many tools that can be used whereby the community can actually recapture and hold on to the land that's in their own community and maintain affordability for people in the long run. Because one of the other things that I was looking at in terms of rapid gentrification of neighborhoods was that, even though people were coming in and buying, and even African Americans were, at a point of being able to own houses, their ability to buy houses was not the same as the other people that were moving in. I say that because they typically didn't have the income to support, what these new mortgages were taking place. So it was important to have a mechanism that created housing that can remain affordable in perpetuity.
Yes, thank you. Especially, I know with the market now, there's a lot of people that are my age and younger that in their minds they feel as if they might not ever get a chance to own a home. But the model in which we are all speaking of today with the community land trust model, especially from what you were saying, Mr. Dunlap, it seems like that model will be able to help and spring forward to current generations and generations to come to still be able to have that dream of actually owning a home. So thank you for that. My next question is going to be to Mrs. Dunlap, or to Miss Dunlap. You are providing support to RPOP as we move toward our incorporation later this year. How do you see a community land trust fitting into the work that RPOP is doing to create Black wealth in Russell and to protect residents against displacement?
I believe that RPOP has, first of all, we've heard both gentlemen mention one model a couple of times. I would suggest to you that there are a series of different ways that RPOP is ultimately going to end up exploring to build home ownership for African Americans in this community, and to preserve that which is already here, by the way. And the land trust is one of those. The value, currently you control, RPOP eventually controls some homes in the neighborhood, both homes that are already being used as housing and also sites that could be developed into housing. If you being RPOP were to create a land trust, and I think that's the intention, then RPOP as the community, because this is a community-owned nonprofit as well, the community would essentially be about making sure that they're developed well, and that's really important. Condition and quality of the housing is as important as any aspect of this. One of the things that you can go build affordable housing and it might stay affordable, but it may or may not have that community investment of neighbors and residents, which will come with RPOP's engagement to ensure that it is a good place for people to live, with some expectation that the school is responsible for providing the education. The context of the housing can be a very important part of the quality of a community land trust activity, as well as the housing itself. So my perspective is that RPOP is going to have an opportunity to build a land trust where there's going to be a number of folks who currently live and or wish to return to this community, that will be able to live in a healthy place where the housing will be affordable. When they come, they will build wealth, as Jason has mentioned, but if they leave, they'll take only a portion of that wealth with them, and another portion of it will stay in the land trust for the next folks. The land trust is a group of people paying attention to the future of the place, the development of the place and the future of the place. Just to take one more minute, we just saw a wonderful presentation about 30th and Madison, and I saw some little building blocks with housing. That's not necessarily a community land trust. It could be a community land trust. It could also be a place where RPOP, as a nonprofit with equitable development goals, preserves the opportunity for residents and community, but it might be a different form of ownership. It might be rental. In fact, my suspicion, given the scale, is it will be rental. So that means that one of the things that RPOP, as a new entity, has to think about is how to develop rental housing that provides equity and also pays for itself, because you will be the owner, operator, mortgage payer. So there's a future which includes a lot of complexity, but a lot of opportunity.
Thank you for that response. You all have been discussing pretty much like the ins and the outs, the purposes, what a community land trust can potentially provide for individuals and also for a community. But the next question that I have for you all, because to be able to have a community land trust, you must first have buy-in from the individuals that will actually be buying the homes in the community land trust or using a certain community land trust model. So what advice do you have to individuals about a community land trust that can be more informative to them at the level that they're at as far as why they should choose this model?
So, as a part of my lived experience, I actually ran a community land trust for about 15 years. Sat on their board of directors for about 10 years. One of the things that I would always say to new homeowners that were interested in the community land trust is that you're not just buying a home, you're actually buying a community. And that, we would set certain expectations that, coming into this type of model is not that, that you just close your door and you just seclude yourself, but you got to be involved. You got to, be with the rest of us as we continue to see the highs and sometimes the lows of what happens in our community. So that is one of the pieces of advice that I used to say to a number of individuals that were interested in the homes that we were selling was, this is about home ownership with participation to a different degree. And that was something that was very much upfront because we wanted to make sure that they understood that, we in this community do things a little bit differently. And I feel like that's a pretty good synergy of what I have witnessed here for at least the 4 years I've been coming back and forth to Louisville, is that Russell, I think, feels that same way. Like if you're in this community, you're doing things a little bit differently than maybe in other communities where they don't know their neighbors, they don't know those other folks. And when issues come up, in other communities, they don't collaborate together to try to solve it. For the community land trust, that's baked in. You got to come together. You got to work together because that's how we actually succeed.
Ditto. Seriously. I would only add that the homeowner and RPOP become partners, and I would add one other piece of information, which is that those land trusts that have existed in the United States tend to be long-term sites for people's families live there longer than they do in other neighborhoods. There's been plenty of research done, which would tell me that it's a great place to live. It's a good place to live. I don't want to ever lose the fact that the collective has to pay attention to the larger community, by the way. Ditto again.
Ditto with one caveat. I think one of the things that we are missing in terms of describing this is that the housing on a community land trust does provide for affordable housing. I can build 2 identical houses, one a part of a community land trust, one that's not a part of a community land trust. And they both can be marketed at, appraised at $300,000. Having a community land trust will allow someone to come into that neighborhood who cannot afford a $300,000 mortgage to be able to live in the exact same house. It's all about keeping the house affordable for the people in this community that we want to keep in the community and to be able to stay there. That's it.
This question again is for all of you. I know Mr. Webb, when you had one of your slides and you were talking about 3 components needed to form a community land trust. And the first one you had on the slide was membership and governance. Now, what you all have been describing is, of course, the structure. You've also talked about the importance of the individuals being members of the community land trust. But can you speak to the ability for those members to change up the governance structure of the community land trust if need be, or is that a possibility?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So within inside of the model itself, one, I will say that it's up to the community to decide that. And there's a high bar within inside the model to be able to change the governance of a community land trust. And the founders wanted to create a high bar because they wanted to make sure that there was a supermajority of members within inside of that organization that wanted to see that change. And that's something that is incredibly important because, again, we've seen over the years other models where sometimes they talk about neighborhood governance in the beginning, and then over time, unfortunately, that starts to chip away and that starts to go by the wayside. And that's because they didn't create themselves a high bar to change that community component. Within the community land trust model, you know, when we say that, you know, a traditional board should be made up of a third of residents that are actually living on the community land trust, a third of the board should actually be made up of other community residents that are not living on the CLT, and then the last third should be other community stakeholders and community partners. Our founders created that sort of, you know, tripartite board very deliberately because they understood that these three groups need to work together to, as what Helen said, to think about the whole community and not just the individual, you know, homes or individual parcels that the CLT is predominantly sort of, you know, owning. That you got to think about the entire ecosystem of that community because it's just one component, but it's an incredibly important component for the entire collective. And we wanted to make sure that as the model, and we've done this throughout the country, that the bylaws of a community land trust cannot be necessarily altered very easily. It needs to go through a series of community conversations, and that community needs to make that ultimate decision.
Thank you.
I would just add community equal membership. Who are the members? Because ultimately, it's the members that are making the choices that you build that high bar. And you all at RPOP just went through a process of electing on a board for a new organization. That's the type of process we're talking about. Now, whether that process is appropriate for this is a conversation that needs to be had. That future group could, in fact, that membership could be the membership for the land trust. You don't have to necessarily have a separate organization, or you might choose to. Those have a lot to do with what you're ultimately trying to accomplish, and the reality of the fact there are going to be other housing activities and housing solutions that RPOP is going to be dealing with. But always think about who are the members. The members are I'm not a member. But I think there are several members in the room.
All right, well, with that, we're going to move to see if there's anybody that is in the audience that has any questions for this lovely panel. We have one question there.
2, 3.
Hi, good morning. I'm Andrea Jarosek with Enterprise Community Partners. We work with a lot of municipalities and housing authorities and community groups across the U.S. That are also trying to set up or are working with community land trusts. And, in the U.S., we consider home ownership as one of the greatest ways to build intergenerational wealth. And one of the common cons we hear to community land trusts is that they don't allow for that building of intergenerational wealth through homeownership, and oftentimes can perpetuate poverty because, for instance, the resale may only allow for a 1% to 5% profit, and on a $100,000 house, that's $1,000 to $5,000. So, just wanted to get your input or insight on that, and how you think that we can kind of counter those arguments.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I was prepared for it because it always comes up. As I said, this is the number one question when you're dealing with a community land trust and when you're dealing with wealth. So the traditional model of affordable housing is basically a giveaway program, and we have to be honest with that. It's not affordable housing, it's actually affordable financing, because you're not actually building an affordable house. You're actually helping somebody get affordable financing to go into the market. So with the community land trust model, though, we're being very specific and we're being very clear. We're building an affordable house, and we need the house itself to stay affordable. Now, we've done studies, and when I say we, I think about Grounded Solutions Network, which is the industry leader of community land trust with the Lincoln Land Institute for Land Policy, that did a 30-year span of homeowners that have actually done these transactions. And while folks would say that, wow, Jason, somebody that is regularly buying an affordable financed home would be able to walk away with $85,000 versus the $30,000 under a community land trust. I would say yes. I would say that this number here also the $30,000 does not represent the rent savings that those individuals also get with being in a home that has a lower mortgage payment than what they would have been paying in rent. So we also got to factor that into these equations as well. But for the community land trust model, I'm not shy to say this is not for everybody. And if you can afford and get into a program that you're going to get the $85,000 and sort of, move on, great. But what is that going to do to your community over time? As what Kevin said, you're literally going to self-gentrify your community without having some sort of protection that's there. So I actually don't necessarily have a comeback to when folks say, well, what if I can only make 2%? I say, if you can find a better deal, please go out and do it. But if you can't, I'm going to get you into home ownership and I'm going to get you on the way. And yes, you're only going to make 2%, but hopefully you'll take that $30,000 as a down payment in your next home. Because the idea is you're hopefully going to get into a home, get a better job, increase your sort of economic status to be able to make that ultimate decision to sell this home and to actually move into the market. The other thing that I will say, and Helen actually brought this up, a lot of community land trust homes in certain communities are designed where it's like, we want to build generational wealth. We actually want to build our homes where the family that actually goes into it actually pays off the house and gives it to that next generation. Then that's when they start to see real wealth, because then they're no longer paying a mortgage payment. The house is actually paid for. That's where we need to get to. And that's what some CLTs also think about as they're creating their first design. So thank you for the question.
I have a pretty simple question. So I'm just interested in the, civics and civic participation, and so the idea that this is like small d democracy in action. So wondering, what is the scope or the range of homes that you're talking about? And like, is it 20 homes, 1,000 homes, 100 homes? What is sort of the ideal to actually have that community participation and self-determination?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we have community land trust that the largest one is actually in Burlington, Vermont. And they have over 3,000 units as a part of their portfolio. My smallest one only has 1 unit, and they're working really hard to get more. Traditionally, what we would see is anywhere between 50 to 300. but it also depends on your community. So in the community land trust that I ran in Boston, Massachusetts, our community land trust owned half of the community, and we only developed 225 units. But in terms of land mass, we controlled half of the acreage in our community. So that was a really good mix of interplay of having market rate homes and having permanent affordable homes. So it all really depends on the geographic area, and also what do you have available to you. That also has to play into it.
Are they contiguous, or like is the land?
For a lot of community land trusts, it's not contiguous. It's actually very much scattered site. And that actually plays to the strength of the model, because you don't want to just isolate these individuals. You want the community land trust to think about the entire fabric of the community. And if you actually have them dispersed throughout the community, then as community land trust staff, you actually are forced to think about that entire block of CLT homeowners and non-CLT homeowners than just going to your own private development of 4 acres, 3 acres, and only working with those homeowners.
All right.
Did you want to just go on?
Well, we do have to actually kind of cut the session. I'm sorry. I know there's tons of questions here. I would encourage you all, as you are grabbing your lunch, to make sure you engage with these individuals that are here. Make sure that you share your contact information so you can continue this conversation. But at this point, we have to break so you all can eat. And then we have another session that's going to begin shortly. Thank you all for being so engaged in the session.
Thank you.